February 1975. The wind off Lake Michigan bit through every crack in the wooden houses lining Maple Creek, a quiet town tucked between frozen cornfields and an endless horizon of snow. On nights like this, headlights cut through the dark like ghosts, and on one of those nights, 19-year-old Emily Carter disappeared. At 9:42 p.m., the waitress clocked out from Hallie's Diner, a small roadside cafe where truckers stopped for coffee and families warmed up after long drives. She stuffed her tips, $17 in singles, into her coat pocket and waved to the cook, "See you tomorrow, Hank." It was the last time anyone heard her voice. The next morning, Emily's mother found her daughter's bed still neatly made, her uniform apron hanging over the chair. The family dog, usually sleeping by the back door, whined at the sound of her mother's footsteps. Something in the house felt wrong, the stillness of a room that should have been alive. When Emily didn't show up for her nursing class or answer the phone, the Carters called the Maple Creek Sheriff's Office. Deputy Glenn Mercer arrived just after noon. He took the report, walked the route Emily normally took home, half a mile of narrow road bordered by pine forest, and found nothing except faint tire tracks pressed into the frozen mud. That evening, local volunteers combed the woods with flashlights. The search stretched until dawn, when a snowstorm forced them to stop. By morning, the trail was buried under 6 inches of new snow. The town of Maple Creek froze in more ways than one. Detective Frank Dalton, 34 and newly promoted, took over the case. His first interview was with Hallie Harrison, the diner's owner. "She left right after closing," Hallie said, wiping his hands on a towel. "Said she was walking straight home. There was a pickup idling across the street, dark green, maybe a Chevy. I didn't see who was driving." Dalton logged the note in his report: possible witness or suspect vehicle, green Chevy pickup, unknown plates. By the second week, the state police had joined the search. Helicopters scanned the frozen fields. Divers checked the river. Posters with Emily's smiling face appeared in grocery stores, post offices, gas stations. Her photo was everywhere, except in the place that mattered most: March 1975. 2 boys fishing along the edge of Ridge Lake, 12 miles north of town, spotted something tangled in the reeds. At first, they thought it was driftwood. Then, one boy screamed. Wrapped in a torn blanket was a human arm, pale, stiff, marked with bruises. Detectives arrived within an hour. Beneath the ice, they found the rest of Emily Carter's body weighted down by an old car tire. Her coat was missing. Her shoes were gone. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the back of the head, likely from a metal object. Time of death, February 22nd, roughly 2 hours after she left the diner. There were defensive wounds on her hands. She had fought. For Dalton, it was personal now. "Someone in this town killed her," he told reporters, "and they're still here." The investigation tore Maple Creek apart. Every local mechanic, trucker, and shift worker became a potential suspect. Dalton questioned more than 80 people. One name surfaced repeatedly: Earl Bishop, a 28-year-old maintenance worker at the County Highway Department. He owned a dark green Chevy pickup and lived 2 miles from the diner. Earl was quiet, polite, always alone. Neighbors called him harmless. But when Dalton searched his property, he found a blood-stained rag behind the shed. Laboratory tests were primitive then. They could only confirm that it was human blood. Without a match, it wasn't enough. Earl denied everything. "Never met the girl," he said. "Truck was parked all night." The case stalled. By summer 1975, the headlines faded. Emily's parents moved away. Detective Dalton transferred to Detroit. The file, marked open, unsolved, sat in a metal cabinet for decades, collecting dust and regret. April 2025. 50 years later, a young detective named Sarah Dalton, Frank Dalton's daughter, reopened the Carter case as part of Michigan's Cold Case Initiative. She was 32, sharp, and relentless. The same traits her father once had. "My dad spent his life believing he missed something," she said. I'm not letting this die with him. The evidence box was small. A few photographs, faded reports, and one brown envelope marked fabric sample, Ridge Lake. Inside was the blood-stained rag. Modern DNA technology turned what had once been meaningless into a gold mine. Within 48 hours, the state lab produced a full profile. It matched Earl Bishop, the same man her father had suspected half a century earlier. Bishop had died in 1998 of a heart attack, but his son, Henry Bishop, 56, still lived in Maple Creek, running the family's auto repair shop. Detective Dalton drove there the next morning. The bell above the shop door jingled as she entered. Henry Bishop looked up from under the hood of a car, grease on his hands, eyes narrowing. "Detective," he said evenly. "Been a while since anyone asked about Emily Carter." She hadn't mentioned the name yet. That evening, she obtained a voluntary DNA sample from Henry under the guise of routine family tracing. The results came back with a shock. The blood on the rag wasn't just Earl Bishop's. It also contained DNA from his son. 2 profiles, 1 crime. The working theory shifted overnight. Maybe Henry had been there in 1975, a child at the time. Maybe he'd seen something, or worse. Dalton pulled old property records. The Bishop farm had backed directly onto the trail Emily used to walk home. A single dirt road separated their fences. And archived utility logs showed something else. A call to the sheriff's office made at 10:18 p.m., the night of Emily's disappearance. The caller never spoke, just heavy breathing before the line went dead. The call came from the Bishop residence. Detective Dalton began reconstructing that night piece by piece using 3D mapping software and digitized crime scene photos. She noticed a pattern her father couldn't see without modern tools. Tire impressions from 2 different vehicles near the diner. One matched Earl Bishop's pickup. The other, an unmarked patrol car belonging to Deputy Glenn Mercer, the same deputy who'd taken the missing person report. Dalton's pulse quickened. She dug through employment files. Mercer had resigned abruptly in 1976, citing health reasons, and moved out of state. No further record. She cross-referenced Mercer's personnel file with the evidence log. Several items from the original case, Emily's coat, the diner's security reel, and a cast of the tire tracks, were signed out by Mercer and never returned. It wasn't just incompetence, it looked like a cover-up. On May 14, 2025, Sarah Dalton presented her findings to the Michigan Attorney General's office. They authorized a full forensic excavation of the old Bishop property. Ground-penetrating radar detected a metallic object buried 6 feet below the barn. When they dug it up, they found a rusted crowbar wrapped in canvas, the same type used by county highway crews in the 70s. Dried blood clung to the handle. DNA confirmed it was Emily Carter's. Partial fingerprints matched Deputy Glenn Mercer. The man sworn to investigate her death had been part of it. Detective Dalton tracked Mercer to a retirement home outside Lansing. He was 84, frail, confined to a wheelchair, and surrounded by framed photos of fishing trips and grandchildren. When she placed the crowbar on the table, his hands began to tremble. "You don't remember me," she said, "but you worked with my father. You told him he was chasing ghosts." Mercer's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't kill her," he whispered. "I just helped bury the truth." Dalton leaned closer. "Then tell me who did." Mercer looked past her, into the distance. "Earl Bishop came to me that night, said he'd hit her by accident with his truck, begged me to help, but when we moved the body, I saw the bruise on her head. That wasn't from a truck." He swallowed hard. "She was already dead when he came for me. I think Henry was there too. He watched." "Why cover it up?" "Because the sheriff's son was driving that patrol car. Sheriff Clark made me make it disappear." Dalton felt the world tilt. Her father had trusted Sheriff Clark more than anyone. The betrayal cut across generations. Mercer died 2 days later, leaving behind a signed statement and one haunting line scribbled in the margin. Secrets don't freeze, they wait for spring. When Dalton returned to Maple Creek, the town buzzed with news crews. 50 years of silence had ended. A small community that once locked its doors in fear now watched officers dig up its history. Forensic teams recovered the missing items Mercer had stolen. Emily's coat, still folded in a plastic bag under his crawl space, and the diner security reel, preserved in a tin case. The footage was blurry, but clear enough. At 9:45 p.m., a green Chevy idled by the curb. A man in uniform stepped out. Emily turned, startled, before the frame went white. The uniform matched the 1970s Maple Creek Sheriff's design, and the badge number on the ... Man's chest was unmistakable. 003, Deputy Glenn Mercer. Dalton closed her eyes. "Dad, you were right," she whispered. "You just didn't live long enough to see it." The snow returned to Maple Creek the same week the truth did. Television vans lined the single-lane main street, antennas stabbing the gray sky, reporters shouting over each other for the perfect soundbite. For a town that hadn't seen attention in half a century, it was suffocating. Detective Sarah Dalton watched from across the street, coffee steaming in her ungloved hand. This was supposed to be her father's victory. Instead, it felt like she was standing in the ruins of everything he trusted. Inside the sheriff's office, Captain Reed dropped a file onto her desk. "Attorney General's office wants arrests by Friday," he said. "You've got 2 suspects, Henry Bishop and whoever was Sheriff Clark's cleanup man back then." "Cleanup man?" Reed nodded. "Name's Don Clark, Jr., the sheriff's son. Mercer's confession puts him behind the wheel of the patrol car." Sarah stared at the page. Don Clark Jr. was now the mayor of Maple Creek. That afternoon, she walked into City Hall. The building still smelled of varnish and stale coffee. Mayor Clark rose from his desk with a politician's smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Detective Dalton," he said smoothly. "I was wondering when you'd come by. Quite the mess your investigation stirred up." Sarah laid a photo on his desk. The diner still shot. Badge 003 visible on the man's chest. "That's you, isn't it?" Clark's jaw tightened. That uniform belonged to half the deputies back then. Could be anyone. She leaned in. "Except the badge number was yours. And the car Mercer logged out that night, registered to your father." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then Clark exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. "You don't know what that town was like in '75, he said. "My father kept the peace any way he could. Earl Bishop hit that girl. The sheriff made sure one tragedy didn't destroy another family." Sarah's voice cut like glass. "You buried an innocent girl to protect your reputation." Clark's smile vanished. "Careful, detective. Statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder, but it does to stupidity. You open that box, you'll take this whole county down with it." She left without another word, her recorder still running in her pocket. Back at headquarters, Sarah listened to the audio 3 times. Each sentence was another nail in a coffin that had waited half a century to close. She built the affidavit overnight. Mercer's statement, Clark's recorded admission, and the new DNA results linking Henry Bishop to the original blood sample. By sunrise, 2 warrants were signed. May 28, 07:14 a.m. Police units rolled up to Bishop's auto repair. Henry Bishop stood outside smoking, as if expecting them. "Guess you found what Dad left behind," he said quietly. Sarah read the charges aloud. Henry didn't resist. As they cuffed him, he said one thing that made her stop. "You think I was a kid watching that night? You're wrong. He made me swing the tire iron first, said if I didn't, he'd do it to me." The words hit harder than any confession. Sarah had prepared for denial, not despair. "You're saying your father forced you?" Henry nodded once. "I was 10. You tell me what choice I had." 2 hours later, she stood outside the mayor's colonial-style home as state troopers surrounded it. The local news filmed live. When Clark stepped out in his tailored suit, his first words were to the cameras. "This is political theater," he barked. "My father's dead. The past is dead." Sarah raised the warrant. "Not for Emily Carter." He froze. For the first time, the mask slipped. "You have no idea what that name did to this town." "I do now." The click of handcuffs echoed down the street. By noon, Maple Creek had become a spectacle. Residents who once avoided talking about the Carter case stood outside the courthouse holding candles. Others shouted that Sarah was ruining good men's names. Inside the press room, the Attorney General announced charges. Henry Bishop, accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. Donald Clark Jr., conspiracy and evidence tampering. Reporters asked the question everyone was thinking. Why now, after 50 years? Sarah stepped to the microphone. Because the truth doesn't expire. That night, she sat alone in her motel room, staring at her father's old case notes spread across the bed. In the margins, he had written 3 words again and again. "She deserves peace." Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She answered. A man's voice rasped through static. "You think you've cleaned it up, but there's more under that lake than you know." The line went dead. Sarah's pulse spiked. She traced the call. It was routed through an old service tower north of Ridge Lake, the same site where Emily's body was found. The next morning, divers returned to Ridge Lake. The ice was long gone, the water dark and heavy. At 15 feet, sonar picked up metallic debris. What they pulled up chilled everyone. On shore, a second tire, another blanket, and a woman's silver locket engraved LC. Inside was a photo of Linda Carter, Emily's older sister, who'd vanished in 1976 after moving to Detroit. Sarah stared at the locket in disbelief. "My dad never mentioned a second case." Captain Reed's voice was grim. Maybe he didn't know, but she wasn't so sure. The discovery exploded across national headlines. Second body linked to 1975 Michigan cold case. Public opinion shifted from shock to horror. How deep did the cover-up go? How many victims? As lab results trickled in, the connections grew darker. The DNA on the locket matched samples from Earl Bishop's toolbox, confirming that Linda Carter had been killed within a year of her sister. The implication was clear. Earl hadn't acted alone in 75, and the sheriff's network had silenced anyone who got too close. When reporters asked Sarah whether Maple Creek was facing a serial cover-up, she didn't answer. She just said, "We're still digging." Late that night, Sarah drove to her father's old cabin outside town, the one she'd avoided since he passed. Dust coated the windows. The porch sagged. Inside, boxes of unsolved case files lined the walls. On the table sat a single envelope addressed to her in her father's handwriting. She tore it open. "If you're reading this, it means you found what I couldn't. I knew Clark was lying, but I couldn't prove it. Mercer warned me I'd end up like Emily if I kept pushing. So I left it for you. Don't stop until they all answer." Beneath the note was a cassette labeled Ridge Lake Confession Tape. Her father had recorded something before he died. Sarah slid the tape into an old player. The audio crackled to life, her father's voice, weary but determined. "It's March 1995. Mercer came to me drunk tonight. Said the Carter girl wasn't the only one. Said there was another body, deeper in the lake. He begged me to let it go. I can't. If anything happens to me, look for the second grave." The tape ended there. Sarah sat frozen. Her father had known, and someone had silenced him before he could tell the world. She whispered into the dark, "I'm finishing this, Dad." Outside, the first snow of the new winter began to fall. Thick, quiet, relentless. 50 years of secrets were surfacing, but one truth remained buried beneath Ridge Lake, waiting for her to drag it into the light. By early December, the lake had turned to glass again. A thin film of ice shimmered under the gray sky. as Detective Sarah Dalton stood at the water's edge. Ridge Lake had given her everything: proof, victims, confessions, and still, it felt like the ground beneath her was holding more. The technicians behind her packed up their equipment. Divers had finished another sweep with no new remains, but Sarah couldn't leave. Her father's voice from that old cassette haunted her thoughts. There was another body, deeper in the lake. "Detective," one of the divers called. "You might want to see this." She walked over. On the screen of a sonar tablet, a shape glowed faintly below the silt line. Rectangular, metallic. Not a tire this time. A steel evidence locker. The next day, they hauled it up. The box was corroded, but intact, marked with the faded stencil, "MCSO Property Room, 1976. Inside were items that had vanished from dozens of unsolved Michigan files: missing person photos, half-burned case reports, and a single sealed envelope addressed to Sheriff Clark. Sarah opened it with gloved hands. Inside was a short, typewritten note. "You wanted the truth buried. Here it is. We did what had to be done. GM. GM, Glenn Mercer." Attached to the note was a 1976 crime scene photo. Another girl, same age as Emily, same dark hair, lying by a drainage culvert 20 miles south of Maple Creek. The case number matched one labeled "accidental death." It wasn't an accident. Sarah spent the next 48 hours in the evidence lab, piecing together decades of forgotten crimes. Each file linked back to one of Clark's deputies. The pattern was unmistakable: women who disappeared between 1974 and 1978. Each case closed within weeks, each involving a deputy's son or close friend. The truth was bigger than Emily Carter. It was systemic. A circle of lawmen protecting their own. The press would call it the Maple Creek cover-up. But for Sarah, it was simply her father's ghost finally screaming loud enough to be heard. On December 9th, 2025, Sarah held a press conference. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps, microphones thrust forward. She stood in her father's old coat, navy, worn at the seams, and read from a single page. For 50 years, this town believed in the wrong men. The same people sworn to uphold the law, twisted it to protect themselves. The evidence you'll see today proves that Emily Carter and at least 3 other young women were victims of a coordinated cover-up. The sheriff's office at the time knowingly falsified reports, destroyed evidence, and threatened witnesses. Those responsible will be held accountable, whether they're alive or not. Reporters shouted questions. "Detective Dalton, is it true your father suspected Sheriff Clark?" "Yes," she said, voice steady. "And he died trying to prove it." That night, national networks replayed her speech on loop. Headlines spread like wildfire. "Cold case detective exposes 50-year law enforcement cover-up. Michigan sheriff linked to multiple unsolved murders." The Attorney General ordered a state investigation. Retired officers were subpoenaed. The once proud Maple Creek Sheriff's badge became a symbol of betrayal. In custody, Henry Bishop finally broke down. "It wasn't just my father," he told investigators. "They made him part of something bigger." Clark said if he didn't help, they'd pin another murder on him. He wasn't the only one they threatened. Sarah asked, "Who else was there the night Emily died?" Henry hesitated. "Someone from your father's team." She froze. "What do you mean?" "Your dad didn't cover for them, Detective," Henry said. "He was trying to make it right. But someone close to him made sure he never could." Sarah pulled her father's 1995 personnel records again. Only one officer had been on his cold case unit back then: Captain Reed. The same Reed now running her investigation. Her chest tightened. She remembered how Reed had steered her away from certain leads. How the Bishop warrant took longer than it should have. How he'd insisted on keeping things internal. She went straight to his office. He looked up, calm as ever. "You've been busy," he said. "You knew about the second body," she said flatly. Reed's expression didn't change. "Your father was a good cop, Sarah. But he didn't understand what he was walking into." "You do." "You killed him," she whispered. He sighed. He wouldn't stop digging. "Clark gave the order. I carried it out. It was supposed to end there." Sarah's hand hovered over her holster. "You think I'm walking away now?" Reed's smile was faint, almost paternal. "No. I think you'll make the same choice I did, to protect the system." She drew her gun. "This is the system." Reed lunged, knocking the weapon aside. The two crashed against the desk, papers scattering. He reached for the drawer where she'd seen him keep his revolver. She hit him first, a quick, desperate blow that sent him sprawling. When he looked up, his face was twisted, eyes full of regret. "I tried to keep it clean," he rasped. "You don't know what they'll do." He reached again. She fired once. The gunshot echoed through the station. Officers rushed in to find Reed on the floor, his own weapon half drawn. Sarah dropped hers immediately. "He went for his gun," she said, voice shaking but clear. The internal review ruled it self-defense, but the truth, what he admitted, stayed between her and the tape recorder in her pocket. Weeks later, as winter deepened, Maple Creek began its slow reckoning. Murals of Emily Carter appeared downtown. The diner where she'd worked reopened, under new owners who named it Emily's Place. Sarah stood by Ridge Lake again, now sealed off with state fencing. The plaque read, "In memory of Emily and Linda Tarter, justice found, never forgotten." She placed her father's badge on the stone beneath it. "For you, Dad," she said softly, "and for them." A gentle wind swept across the lake, rippling the ice. Months later, the Netflix adaptation premiered, The Maple Creek Cover-Up. It opened with archival footage of snow blowing across an empty road and Sarah's voice narrating over it. For 50 years, a small town carried a secret it didn't deserve. It took one detective's promise to her father to finally break the silence. As the screen faded to black, white letters appeared. "Justice delayed, not denied." That night after the premiere, Sarah returned home to her quiet apartment. On her kitchen table sat a single envelope, no return address. Inside was a faded Polaroid of her father standing beside Sheriff Clark, both smiling at a department picnic. On the back, in neat handwriting, "The lake wasn't the only place we buried things." Her hand tightened around the photo. The story wasn't over, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to keep digging.